Continuing example 3D. Our next step is to calculate an activity rate for each activity. Now, an activity rate is basically the same thing as any other kind of overhead allocation rate. We're going to take the cost for each of our cost pools, and we're going to divide it by the total of the activity that we're going to use to allocate. So for the machining cost, we're going to use machine hours. For materials handling, we'll use material moves. And for purchasing, receiving, and inspection, we're going to use purchase orders. But in order to calculate the activity rate, we need to know the total of the activity that we're going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'll copy and paste the table onto here, and I'll add one more line item. All of these are in number of machine hours or moves or purchase orders per unit, so we need to multiply that by the number of units produced, 6,000, 4,000, and 1,500. And so what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the total of each of these activities that each product uses, and then we're going to multiply, or we're going to add those together to come up with the total for each activity. So for the A pod, since we use 6,000, we make 6,000 units, and each unit uses 8 machine hours. We're going to use a total of 48,000 machine hours. We're going to use 6,000 times 3, or 18,000 material moves, and 6,000 times 2, or 12,000 purchase orders. Same thing for the B pod. It's going to use a total of 20,000 machine hours, 24,000 material moves, and 20,000 purchase orders. And the C pod is going to use a total of 7,500 machine hours, 18,000 material moves, and 16,500 purchase orders. And the total is just going to be the sum of what the three products use in total. So now that we know that in order to make all the products we're going to make, we're going to use a total of 75,500 machine hours, which we already knew from above, 60,000 material moves, and 48,500 purchase orders. Now we can use this and our total cost for each pool and come up with an activity rate. So we've got our 3 cost pools: machine cost, materials handling, and purchasing, receiving, and inspection. We've got our total cost of $239 for machine cost, $277 for materials handling, and $274 for purchasing, receiving, and inspection. We've got our total activity for each of these 3 products, or sorry, for each of these 3 activities: 75,500 machine hours, 60,000 materials moves, and 48,500 purchase orders. And so our activity rate is simply going to be the cost divided by the activity. And so it's going to be $3.17 per machine hour, $4.62 per material move, and $5.65 per purchase order. So these are our activity rates. So just like above, we used our dollars per machine hour, or $10.46 per machine hour, to allocate all of our overhead cost. Now we're going to take our overhead cost, splitting it up into these 3 different pools, and each of these pools is going to have a separate activity rate that it will use to allocate overhead cost to product. And that's going to allow us to do the next step. We're going to allocate the cost to each unit of each product using these activity rates. So machine cost, purchase, materials handling, and purchase, receiving, inspection. For the A pod, how much machine cost is going to be allocated to a unit of an A pod? It's going to be the 8 machine hours for a unit times $3.17 per machine hour. For materials handling cost, it's going to be the 3 material moves times $4.62 per move. And for purchase, receiving, inspection, it's going to be the 2 purchase orders that we issue for every unit we make times $5.65 per purchase order. And so the sum of the 3 overhead costs per unit is going to be $50.47. Take the same approach for the B pod. How much overhead are we going to allocate to a B pod? It's going to be, for the machining cost, 5 machine hours times $3.17 per machine hour. For materials handling, 6 material moves per unit times $4.62 per move. And for PRI, 5 purchase orders times $5.65 per purchase order. And so it's going to be $71.78. And for the C pod, again the same thing, 5 machine hours times $3.17 per machine hour. For materials handling, 12 material moves times $4.62 per move. And for purchase orders, 11 purchase orders times $5.65 per purchase order. And the total overhead cost for a C pod is now $133.37. And if we're going to stop here, we can take a look and see what the difference is. So here we've got our overhead cost calculated according to the activity-based costing approach. And above, we'll be able to see the overhead cost calculated according to the traditional approach. So in our previous approach, the A pod got the most overhead cost allocated to it. B pod and C pod both got a smaller amount because they used fewer machine hours. Now what this method assumed is that all the overhead costs, which are all being allocated the same way, were used or consumed or dedicated to these 3 products in the same proportion that the machine hours were. And so this approach didn't allow the C pod to be considered more expensive because of the non-machine related resources that it consumes. The activity-based costing approach does recognize, if we look at the machine cost line, it does recognize that the B pod and the C pod use fewer machine hours than the A pod. But it also allows for the materials handling cost to be allocated much more heavily toward the C pod, and for the purchase, receiving, inspection cost also to be allocated much more heavily to the C pod. So now we've got overhead costs that much more closely align to the use of overhead resources that the products consume. And this probably gives us a better and more helpful understanding of overhead costs. So we'll stop there, and the next video we'll pick up with requirement 7.